Coming up on Extra Edition, we get a rare glimpse inside an actual police interrogation. This morning, you're going to hear more about what really goes on inside those rooms. But first, sexual assault charges are dropped against Duke lacrosse players. How might this sensational case affect future rape cases? We have two different points of view on that next on Extra Edition.
From News 4 and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, this is Extra Edition.
Good morning. Welcome to Extra Edition. I'm Mark Cox. The families of three former Duke University athletes are celebrating this weekend after a year-and-a-half nightmare for them has come to an end. On Thursday, a sensational criminal case against the lacrosse players seen here entering this news conference was dropped. A stripper accused the three of assaulting her after a party, but North Carolina's Attorney General said on Thursday the accuser's story simply didn't hold up as far as he was concerned. Many have blamed the former prosecutor, Mike Nifong, in that case for the Duke debacle. Others blame society and the legal system itself, which they believe maybe is too quick to convict men in assault cases. That's what one thing David Usher thinks. David is a local software engineer. He's on the steering committee of the national organization RADAR, which stands for Respecting Accuracy in Domestic Abuse Reporting. Also joining us this morning, Kathleen Hanrahan, who's director of SART, the St. Louis Regional Sexual Assault Center. And thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
David, let me start with you. These three young men faced 30 years in prison, effectively, had they been convicted of this. Now the Attorney General says what happened here was basically a rogue prosecutor. I get the impression you're not surprised by that.
Well, I was the first journalist and analyst who called the entire case a false accusation. That was just a few weeks after it was first filed. And the reason why is because all the classic markers of a false case, such as you see in McMartin and Little Rascals, some of the other infamous child abuse cases, all those classic markers were there in the Duke case. And a lot of people said, boy, Dave, you're really going out on a limb on this one, but you know, as it turns out, I was correct.
Well, we see what happened there with the DNA, and the minute the DNA came into question, whether it even existed or not, maybe everyone had a few questions in their mind about how they were going to go forward with this. Kathleen, let me have you comment on that for just a moment. What is your reaction to what happened in this Duke case?
Thanks, Mark. Number one, I would describe the young woman as I believe she was 21, 22. She's a student. She's a mother supporting her child. I wouldn't describe her as a stripper. That's how she earns her living. That's how she pays her tuition. I wasn't a bit surprised. At the YWCA St. Louis Regional Sexual Assault Center, we provide services to over 1,000 victims of trauma a year. Over 447 victims in 2006 in our local emergency rooms. 75% of those victims consistently, in naming their attacker, know who their attacker is. This is pretty typical of the behavior that we see on college campuses, that we're very slow to respond, especially to support the victim's accusations. The U.S. Department of Justice tells us that these crimes are the most underreported crimes in our history. Only about 41% report. And actually, I've been doing this for a little over 12 years actively at the Sexual Assault Center. That number's actually up. It used to be over 6%. What we've done in our communities is improve our response to victims of sexual violence and respond in a way that makes them more willing to come forward. Something like this, and you might notice that the victim has not recanted her story. She has maintained that she would still like to move forward with this. Evidence is extraordinarily difficult in these cases. There are usually no witnesses that will come forward in this case. And what happens is it depends on the word of these fine, upstanding young college boys and this young woman who's pretty marginalized in her life.
Right, but the prosecutor in this case didn't come out and say that these men were not guilty. He came out and said they were innocent. He
said they were innocent, which is a very strong statement for them to make. In sexual assault cases, very often, I think nationally only 4% of these cases are prosecuted. Oftentimes at the Sexual Assault Center, what we wind up doing is working with victims to validate their experience, validate their trauma. Post-traumatic stress disorder is the name of the game with the folks we see. The Center for Disease Control tells us that sexual violence is the single largest contributor to that disease which is actually crippling many members of our society. So what we work to do is validate their experience, help mitigate the initial trauma, so down the road in 6 months or 3 months or 10 years or 20 years, they don't experience the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which can actually shut down their productivity.
Right.
And shut down their lives.
David Usher, Radar, the organization that you are a member of, would argue not necessarily, I don't want to group this all into sexual assault cases. Domestic abuse cases is specifically what this refers to, that men are as likely to be the victims as women. Where do you get statistics like that?
Well, every major study on domestic violence, and I'm talking in terms of studies about convictions, where you can't just look at accusations and reports. And I think Kathleen referred to how they validate. And see, that is the problem with our prosecutorial system right now, is we do not test to see if it actually happened. We merely validate, could it have happened? And if you look at the history of the Duke case, the entire case, the way Nafong and everybody else handled it, it was more on the theoretical, could it have happened, in spite of all the exculpatory evidence, such as the DNA, the cab driver who showed that one of the guys wasn't even there, and so forth and so on. And so, the thing is, we have to get away from this validatory prosecutorial system, and because, it does us no good to send 9 people to prison, 9 innocent men to prison, so that one guilty person does not get off.
Kathleen, I'm guessing that you would disagree with the statistic.
Absolutely.
That there are as many men as women who are victims?
Well, you find that in our intimate partner violence, boyfriend, girlfriend kind of things, that actually is an accurate statistic for the 12 to 17 age group, when we're dealing with injuries or physical assault such as hitting, slapping, pushing, shoving. But when we start to deal with the more serious assaults, as we move into intimate partners, sharing a child, living together, cohabitating, or being married, the U.S. Department of Justice and the Center for Disease Control tells us that once we start to move toward the assaults, as in punching with a closed fist, using an object, sexually assaulting somebody, pushing them down a flight of stairs, setting them on fire, burning them. This is what we deal with day in and day out. You see that then that's when our statistic moves to 75 to 80% of the perpetrators are male. Okay. So our centers, our statistics that we're working with, the major studies, I'm not sure what exactly David is referring to. All the statistical work that we work with comes from the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Statistics, and the Center for Disease Control.
I hate to cut you off there. Interesting conversation. Kathleen Hanrahan, thank you for coming in from SART. We appreciate that. David Usher, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you.